Hello, welcome back to a new episode of For the Love of Weather podcast. This is the podcast where we discuss all things weather and how they can impact our daily lives. We really hope that you leave this episode and every episode that you listen to loving the weather just that little bit more. Hi, I'm meteorologist Gemma.
And hi, I'm Aisling, weather presenter and meteorologist. Our guest today is Kathy Morrisey. You're a planning insight director of Stansted Airport, and we have had a little chat just before the podcast started, and many, many other things. So going to try and summarize all of that. Previously, you were the director of engineering, but you started your career as an engineer. You diverted over to environment and sustainability and have done many more things since then. But the one thing that you've always been very passionate about is bringing along female side, of what you do, making sure that there's plenty of women and you're passing on that message that girls can do anything as well. Because realistically, what you do is a very male dominated
Yep.
role. So hopefully today from chatting to you, we'll find a little bit about why you love what you do, how the weather impacts it, and yeah, how somebody can get into what they're doing if
Okay.
how they if they want to.
Thank you for
So,
having me.
oh, you're very welcome. So without further ado, we always like to ask our guests the very first question. What was that first moment or that little spark of joy where you thought to yourself, I might just be an engineer?
So I thought quite a bit about this recently, and I think my biggest influence really was my dad, and he was a physics teacher. He was a bit of a larger than life character, and he had three girls. There was three of us, and then a boy. Eventually, he got a boy, but he didn't believe there was any barriers to what his girls could do, and so I had no kind of traditional kind of expectations of what women could do. And he expected, he just seemed to be a bit kind of like not really conscious that we were girls. He taught us to play football. He was a big rugby player. We played rugby, we played cricket. I had more Meccano and more Lego in my toy box than I had dolls or anything like that. And so he just didn't seem to recognize that there was barriers to women, and he was just so proud of what we'd all done. He also really coached us he was a teacher. He was a big fan of education, and he really believed in that. And he didn't think there was any difference in terms of the right of a woman to have education versus a boy. And he just really believed that his daughters could, conquer the world. And I think that kind of belief in us really set me up, that there was no, I loved my maths, and I'm not sure whether that was a natural thing or whether that was my dad emphasizing it and doing maths puzzles with us, but I loved my maths, and so and he really encouraged me. So I think having somebody who's that kind of like almost blind expectation that nothing can stop you, and you could do anything that the boys could do, kind of just helped me along. And the thing that I really liked, and I love math. I still love puzzles. I do my daily Sudoku and all that kind of thing. But I just think maths is just one big puzzle. So and there were lots of tricks to it. And I used to just love nothing more. Actually, it's a bit sad. I used to love nothing more than he used to bring all the past papers home for my O levels at the time, shows my age, and A levels. And I used to love nothing more than just kind of going through all these questions, which was a bit nerdy, but yeah, I just really enjoyed it. And so I ended up thinking about, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I knew that I love science and I knew I love my maths. So I ended up just plumping for engineering. And I guess I didn't really want to do physics because my dad had done physics, and I didn't just want to do exactly what he'd done. So I ended up doing engineering.
I love that. I absolutely love that. I didn't get to science until kind of later in life, and I wish somebody had been like, well, you're obviously much better at that than all the other stuff you're trying to do. That's amazing. That's absolutely incredible. So you didn't want to go into meteorology. If you were doing physics and chemistry and maths, you'd have been the perfect candidate.
I guess in those days, I don't think that we had the vision that people have today. So young people have just a wealth of information at their fingertips in terms of what careers they can do, all the social media, anything that they want to know, they can just search on YouTube or Google or Facebook or whatever. And I just don't think that we had that breadth of knowledge of what careers were available at the time. And, you know, to find out different careers, you had to go and speak to the careers teacher, who was a teacher and therefore had had a teaching career and not anything else. Or I remember ploughing through this book, this hard copy book of the different types of jobs you could do, which was a fairly boring thing to do. So it wasn't really brought to life. So I think, you know, there was much more of a focus on traditional subjects and not really much exposure to what else could do. So in another life, meteorology might have been a good thing.
Well, there's still this life. You can always come and join us. So you've made it all the way to Inside Director for Stansted Airport. I mean, has there been any barriers along the way, or have you just not seen any or felt any?
So I think yes, there's lots of little things, I would say. There's lots of little things that happen along the way that you end up, or I've ended up just kind of ploughing through and almost ignoring that and kind of getting on despite that. So, you know, there is this kind of like level of gravitas you have as a woman. I think now I'm more senior, that isn't quite the case. But certainly when I was more junior, so for example, I would kind of go to a meeting and I would take one of my team with me who happened to be male. They reported to me and we'd be meeting a contractor or something. And I would be kind of the one going up saying, right, I am Kathy. This is my colleague. This is my colleague here. And I would ask questions and the other contractor would just look the guy in the eye, would never look me in the eye and directly answer to the male in the room, even though I'm the one asking the questions, even though I'm the boss. So, you know, I find that I think more recently, it's more obvious because there's a lot more awareness of that. But I certainly think that still happens, you know, on a construction site. I've got young women in the organisation who are part of the Women's Network and, you know, they've experienced things like that. And then there's the kind of banter that goes around and, you know, we have a big thing at the moment about raising awareness about microaggressions. I don't know if you've heard of those, but they're just those little niggles, you know, that constantly undermine you. And you know, if it's just one thing, can't you take a joke? We were just messing with you. But it's those kind of like constant little niggles that generally is really saying, actually, you don't belong here. You're a woman, you don't belong here. So, and I've kind of over the years just really ignored that and kind of ploughed on. And in some ways, looking back, I wish I'd perhaps been more challenging towards it because, you know, it didn't help. Just ploughing through probably didn't help women coming through behind me. So I have a bit of a passion around raising awareness around that. So we've done quite a lot of work as part of the Women's Network about that kind of microaggression. And we've done it alongside the race. We have a race and ethnicity group, and we have a mental health group. So we work very collaboratively with some of the other what we call colleague resource groups in the company, just raising awareness because people just don't know they're doing it, and it is just a laugh, and you know, and it's just general banter, but it can really undermine people and make them feel like they don't belong. So I think I experienced a lot of that. And then there is that kind of expectation around, they don't expect you to be a manager. So, you know, sometimes they'll say, well, you better ask your boss about that. And I'm thinking, well, excuse me, I'm the boss. So, you know, and that kind of stuff, you get. And so it's like the automatic assumption that you are not kind of the boss or not in charge is kind of the things that you face. But I think things have changed a lot, certainly at Stansted. And I love working at Stansted. It's a very collaborative environment. So when I joined Stansted 15 years ago, the only head of department who was female was the HR director or HR head of HR. Now, when I got to be head of department, it was 50-50. So that had really changed. But the next bit was to kind of get into the director cohort. So there was myself and another woman who both got a job in the directors team at the same time. And that really kind of upped the kind of level of women. It's still more men than women at that level, but it's kind of the level of seniority is going up. So that is when I think back, that's a huge change to sit in a room where it's 50-50 at head of department level, you know, is I think is great. The company is aiming for 50-50 right up to the top.
It's really interesting actually when I did my first uh, aviation training, I was on an airfield, but I was one of the batch of first like years that there was more females than males that had gone through the course. And actually I was
Yep.
there on the day in the Falklands when it was the first all-female team.
Wow.
And that is not that long ago.
No.
It's really, really crazy. But it
Yeah.
is good to see that things are changing. I have a really interesting, perhaps just curious question for you because it's something I've struggled with. So I've done a lot of different jobs. I've actually done some surveying as well outside. So it's cold, gets really, really
Yeah.
cold, and it can be really uncomfortable for different reasons for women out and about. And there's nothing you can do about it. That's just the way it is. Have you noticed much of a change in the clothing? Because when you're working outdoors, everything's all like massively sized, but there's nothing actually
Yeah.
designed really for women with women in mind.
No.
Like even your boots
Yes.
are just
So
uncomfortable.
if I think back to when I was like 22, 23, and I started off as an engineer, I was working on the oil rigs in the North Sea, in the oil industry. And I just was look, I had like, the full kind of boiler suit, these rigger boots, a hat that was far too big for me that came right down here, and these massive kind of safety glasses. And I was just like, I guess I got used to kind of rolling the sleeves up and the legs up and just stomping around in these, I used to take like 3 pairs of socks to put these boots on. That was the smallest they could find, absolute smallest. So, I mean, I don't know how, if my safety was affected by having ill-fitting clothes, but that was just, because I was generally the only technical woman at the time. This is in the 1990s. I just kind of accepted it and got on with it and thought, oh, I'm a bit of an oddity here. But there were some small blokes on the riggers as well, and they had very baggy clothes too. So it wasn't just me. But I think that's one area actually that hasn't changed enough. I think I still have a kind of high vis jacket at work that's too big for me. And, there's not really that much distinction between the male and female in the PPE sizes. I did actually go out and buy my own safety shoes at one point because they had some ladies' safety shoes, but they just look ridiculous. So yeah, so I think yeah, I have done my stomping around in great big boots and boiler suits and looking ridiculous, but you know.
I'm glad to hear they're doing something about sizing. It's ridiculous. There's always like triple XL of stuff lying
Yep.
around. And like, why is that? Why is that
Yeah.
happening? Tell us a little bit more about the time on the rig. So first of all, you would have been the only
Oh.
woman. How did you manage with the weather?
Um, well, I worked in the North Sea. So I guess, yeah, we're talking about the weather. So there was various aspects to that. You used to have to go out on the helicopters. And that was an experience in itself because you all had to have survival training and wear these kind of like full body suits because it was after Piper Alpha had been like, I don't know, 10 years or 8 years before that. And so the kind of all of the safety procedures and all of the kind of kit that you had to wear had kind of moved on a lot. So you had to wear these really tight kind of body suits, like survival suits. You had to wear those in the helicopter and you would fly out to the rig. Generally speaking, you it would be fine. I was out to a rig once when because the rigs, some of the exploration rigs actually float and they're connected via kind of what they call a riser to the seabed. And the rig kind of floats up and down around this with the kind of waves and whatever. And actually, I was in a helicopter when it was moving too much and they couldn't land. And so they kind of come in and the thing's moving up and down and go up and then come in again. And then we ended up just flying back. So you kind of think, oh yeah, I've got another night on dry land. But you have to go back in the morning. But the other thing about the North Sea is that you could have times when it was literally like a mirror. The sea was so beautiful and so completely flat. You couldn't even see ripples on it. And you could see, and it was absolutely beautiful. And then you have days when you've got the waves crashing and the rig is going backwards, up and down, backwards and forwards. We had one time I was doing a bit of work and because you were outside doing the work, what we used to do actually was once they drilled a well, we used to do kind of telemetry. So we used to put these tools, like long, thin tools down the hole on the end of a cable. and we used to kind of gather data of what kind of what kind of rock they had, whether they had any fluid, if it was water, if it was gas, if it was oil. Generally not very much, to be honest, when you're exploring. It's more nothing than striking oil. So I can remember being out there, and it was absolutely howling gale, and the snow and the ice was forming on the derrick of the rig and then forming into great big snowballs, and we was like getting someone throwing snowballs at you. Got to the point when we were all told, right, everyone's got to stop, go inside, because it was getting a bit kind of hazardous. So yeah, the weather could be, as I say, like a mirror, just gorgeous and brutal. Yeah. The worst thing is when you're on the rig and you want to get home and the helicopter can't land. That's not nice.
No. I was just thinking that when you said the helicopter didn't land, I was like, I bet you there was a few people that were like, get me off this rig.
Oh yes. Yeah.
Just listening to you talk as well, I was thinking, I'm feeling a little bit seasick just listening to you talk about what was going on with the weather there.
Yeah. Not like a ship though. You don't really feel like there's a little bit of movement, but you don't really feel like you're on a ship kind of swaying around. And then some of the bigger rigs are platforms, and so they're solid. They've got feet that sit on the bottom of the sea, so they're solid.
It's obviously fond memories though, because I can see by the way you're talking about it, that was actually, whilst it was a unique time in your life, it was an
adventure, and I wanted an adventure. That's what I wanted when I was 21, 22.
And you were the only female.
Generally, I think there was a couple of times there was another female, generally like a geologist would be there, because they would do, work alongside us, and they would do quite a bit of the interpretation of some of the information that we would gather. But there would often be women who would be cleaning or would be in the kitchens. So some of these rigs have huge kind of catering facilities. So there'd very often be a few women in there, but they would always kind of be quite self-contained. So but it was nice. It was actually nice to see females, whatever they were doing.
So Ash and I are really passionate about getting women involved in weather and climate as much as we can. And I'd like to ask you, what are some of the barriers that you think that there are trying to get into STEM subjects and jobs in the first place before they've even maybe sort of made the decision that they want to do that? Like, what barriers do you think there are?
I think you've got to get them young. And I think it's about expectations. And I think I had somebody, my dad, who loved science and just kind of bred that love of science and that belief that I could do it. There was no reason why I couldn't do that. And so I think there's that kind of expectation. So it's overcoming those expectations of women and girls. I think also there's quite a bit of peer pressure for young girls around, what would they want to be, and sometimes I think being good at science is kind of a bit unusual. So if you're the kind of person who wants to be in the cool gang, then it might not, which I certainly wasn't. That might not be the thing that you want to do. And I think the other big thing, and I have been thinking about this before, knowing I was coming on this podcast, is I think it's role models as well. And I really think it's having women who are in the media or go out to schools and talk about, what it's like to be a woman, how, there really isn't any barriers to, and particularly for kind of engineering. I say, engineering is not being a car mechanic necessarily. It could be. You're not kind of getting your hands really dirty all the time. You could be designing stuff. You could be project managing stuff. It's all problem solving, doing performance improvement, all of these different things that are not what you typically say was kind of an engineer with kind of overalls and things like that. I mean, I loved kind of stomping around in my overalls, but that is not totally what engineering. There's lots of different types of engineering and science, and so I think having those kind of role models and seeing people do that, either people like me going out and speaking to groups of girls or schools, or and I think it's important to speak to the boys as well. And it's important for the boys to see a female engineer and a female leader, talking about those kind of technical things. And so they have that belief in that. So I think those role models, but I think there's not enough kind of made of female scientists in the press and in the, we've got some great, like Carol Kirkwood. I know Dave was talking about her on your last podcast. And, there are some females out there who really stand out, but there's not really that kind of female Brian Cox, if you like. And I really think that would, make it cool and make it, because there's a lot of girls who love maths, and somehow I think we lose a lot of the girls who really love the kind of science. And I haven't quite found the panacea. And I think that's the frustrating thing. And I just keep plugging away. And I ask, having conversations like this, and I ask girls, or other people, what is it? What can we do to get more girls to stay with their science? And is it kind of it because it's cool, or is it because they get teased, And I did a bit of a listening session. We have a college on the airport, which is part of Harlow College. We built this kind of higher education college on the airport, which we're really proud of. And I've been over there and kind of chatted to the girls, and they do teach engineering over there. And they said, even at that age, there is a bit of banter. And the boys are kind of saying, oh, your place is at home, why are you here? And all that. So supposedly in jest, that is happening in teenagers, and I was a bit shocked because I thought that happened to me, but that was like 30 years ago. So there is still that kind of, the girls are still an unusual thing, and they have to hold their own, and they have to kind of be resilient to these kind of comments that are made. And I think educating boys as well as girls around that equality is so important. And for boys to see women who are leaders, women who are decision makers, and women who are scientists, that they should see that. And I think that's what we should be kind of really focusing on.
It's really, we've hit on some really, just really interesting points. Myself and Gemma are nodding along crazy with you here, like listening to what you're saying about visibility, being seen. We both do this podcast because we love the weather, and we want somebody else to find it and know that they could do that as well. And we both love talking at schools and that, but they're just nodding at so many things where it's like, how is it 2024 now? And we're still looking at Instagram posts of people trying to fix how they look. And like there's this other pressure of, and it's again, but it's just visibility in a different way. So,
Yeah.
Being clever is still not cool, in ways. For as far along as we have come, it's still, it can be hard to shine sometimes at what you're good at, I think, when you're a female, because there's just so many other things going on in the world. And it does come from home. So if you're listening to something at home, not everybody's listening to like, a figure who's like saying, just go ahead and do that then,
Yeah, exactly.
There's so many other barriers. I'm really interested in your college.
Yeah.
Was that your idea?
No. So we have a department that looks at education, skills and employment. So, it's important that we have a future pipeline of employees at the airport. There are 12,000 people who work at the airport. About 2,000 of them work for actually Stansted Airport or Manchester Airport Group, who run the airport. But there's also people who work there's pilots, there's the ground staff, there's the retail, there's all kinds of, it's like a small town if you think about the airport campus. And so, we employ, or businesses on the airport employ over 12,000 people. So we have a big challenge over the next, I guess, 10, 15 years, because the type of skills that we will need are changing, because we are becoming much more automated, much more digitally focused. And so we're going to need more of those skills. We know. We also really major on customer service. That is kind of one of our big mantras around when you come to the airport, you should have, this shouldn't be kind of a necessary evil. We want you to have a good time coming through the airport. It's the start of your holiday. You don't get stressed. You go into, because airports can be really stressful places. You go through into the departure lounge, and ideally you have a nice meal, or you shop or whatever it is, and then you head off on your holiday. So we know we're going to have in the future a big demand for skills and resources at the airport. And so investing in education and skills is great for us. And we're really proud of the college. We do it in partnership with Harlow College. And so, I think it's about investing in skills and young people for the good of the kind of airport community, and generating those skills that we know we're going to need.
I think what you've touched on something really important there, and about the sort of overcoming some of the barriers through the the college that you have about educating people that way, but is there another way that we can overcome some of the barriers that are in place for girls that are trying to get into STEM? Like, is there other things that we could be doing?
Yeah, again, I kind of thought through this. I think it is about kind of communication, making science fun, about having role models. But I think that there are role models out there, right? So there are lots of women throughout history, and I read about them all the time, who have been scientists and very successful and leaders and been a real driving force. And they just over the years have not had the credit for it. So, I like to kind of read a lot about kind of women who've really made a difference, because they've often been looked over. Look at what happens with Marie Curie. She got her awards very, very late and posthumously, but her husband took the credit. They assumed that he was the driving force behind of all of that, which is just terrible. So there's a lot of women who haven't had that credit, and I think probably it would be, I'm trying to kind of dig out nice stories of women who've really made a difference, and I think that it's just that kind of, the role models existed years ago. They just never got that kind of kudos or credit for it. I feel like that's something that we could do better at. But I think it's, it is just that kind of like, having really enthusiastic role models, teachers, people that you could aspire to, and just making it seem like it's normal to have women in the decision-making process. It's normal to have women in the teams. And I think we're getting there slowly in this country. Unfortunately, there are countries where that's not happening at all, but we are getting there slowly in this country. And some professions do better than others. So, things like doctors and lawyers are, I think, women are probably make up more than 50% of the population, but those kind of science subjects are lagging behind. And it just needs to look like it's a normal thing that you would go into science and you would have women in a science workplace. Or
Yeah, I think role models is a really important thing about making it visible within the community, but also, like you say, in the media. I think there are some that do that really well. There's not enough of them. You're right, there isn't enough of them. But like, I was on social media the other day, and I think Dr. Hannah Fry is amazing at making maths and science really interesting and making it really relatable to different audiences and to our everyday life. So there are some, but there is just not enough. We need to have more in the media, but we also need to, as you say, recognize people that have done it in the past and made the discoveries, and let people know about these people that are so amazing. They're such amazing women, and we should all know their names.
And also just about their backgrounds as well, because it's the most, what appears to be something which is the most ordinary makes the most extraordinary,
I think
things happen.
A really big thing for me as well, probably I should have mentioned this earlier, is about, this is not for us to solve on our own, right? This is men's problem as well as women's problem. And I think that, we have to educate boys. We have to, keep up kind of awareness raising with men. Some of my greatest mentors have been men. And actually, we have this thing called allyship at MAG, and we encourage men to kind of support women, and we provide tidbits of how you could support, like for example that example that I gave around somebody speaking to my male colleague. Actually they could say, well, actually she asked you the question, why don't you answer her? There are things that a male could say to kind of make sure that you're included in the conversation, or that something like that is called out. Sometimes it's easier for the male to call that out than it would be for the woman or myself to kind of, say something. So I think that really, really kind of, we're in it together with the guys. This is not women versus men, or, or some kind of crazy kind of, historic version of feminism. This is not what this is. This is us working together for a more equal world. And actually it benefits everybody, because diversity in decision making is proven to end up in better results, in better decisions. They maybe take longer to get there because you've got more points of view, but they actually end up as being a better results in the end. And there are lots of examples of where you bring someone who thinks differently into a situation, and they just come up with a very unique take on things. And so, it's a benefit for business. Businesses do better when they have gender equality on the boards. So it just makes good sense in society. Why wouldn't you have 50% of the population being represented in a decision-making process? So, for me, I'm a scientist. This is completely and utterly logical to me. I just can't see how it could be, how it should be any different. So I think we need to do this with men, because this is up to men as well. We're in this together, and we need to ask for help. We need to support each other, and we need to really, this is not us against them, us against the world, us against men. This is something we need to work on together.
Here to that. I love that. Just before we move on, I do have one more question for you. Is there anything memorable that's happened in any of your jobs where you thought to yourself, oh yeah, no, I'm definitely doing the right thing? You knew you're doing what you loved.
Quite a lot of things, really. Do you know what I really love is seeing my team come together and succeed. So things that I've really loved is when a group of my team has been working on a project, and they come to the end of the project, it's been successful or whatever, and we can, or they do some kind of development program and they succeed in that, or somebody who's come up through the ranks and gets a promotion. I've kind of a bit cheesy, really. I think I used to kind of send emails out saying this person has done brilliantly, and so that makes me really kind of happy when you've kind of nurtured somebody and they're successful. Yeah, I was a bit of a mother hen when I had my engineers. But the other thing is I like nothing more than putting my kind of PPE on and going out and seeing stuff. And I know I spoke earlier about I used to manage environmental pollution and stuff for the airport, and I used to like nothing more than going out and looking at, going down to the ponds, going down and looking at drainage systems, going and looking. So, I'm a big I like that kind of being involved in the practical side of things. So if someone comes to me with a problem, I'll often say, well, come on, let's go and see, let's show me what it is, because I like to be able to picture it. And there's nothing more that I like than kind of in general, just kind of stomping around and seeing what's going on in reality, and getting stuck in, really, and asking lots of questions. I think that's the other thing, just be curious all the time and make it your business to find stuff out. So I think that's done me very well in my career is, I haven't always kind of done the thing that I'm completely qualified for, but I've made it my business to go and find stuff out.
Before we move on to the get to know me round, I was just wondering if there is someone listening to this podcast. I hope there are loads of people listening to this podcast, but if there's someone listening to this podcast that is either a parent or they're a teacher or they're thinking about getting into science-based career, do you know if there's any resources for them to access to find out more information or anything that they could go to?
Well, there's lots of, a lot of the kind of associations will have women in leadership, or so there's, if I think about, there's women in aerospace and aviation, there's women in transport. So there's lots of kind of groups. So if there was a particular career that someone wanted to go down, then there are loads of resources out there. A lot of these organizations will offer mentoring programs, so you could sign up to be mentored by a woman or a man, just get some mentoring. So I would, if you wanted to get particularly into transport, there are organizations that will support young women and offer mentoring schemes, and sometimes they will offer kind of development programs, and they will have a lot of resources on there if there was a particular thing. If you really want to go down the pure engineering route, there's the IET. They have like a kind of women in engineering section, but there's loads of information on that as well. There's just so much stuff compared to when I was kind of thinking about what I wanted to do, really. And the other thing that I would do is call someone up. If you've got a friend or a relative who works in engineering or works in science, just see if you can go and have a look and see what they do. And what's great with our education centre is we get schools and teachers to come to the airport, and we talk to them about aviation. We talk to them about all the different jobs you could do at an airport. And we also have a viewing platform where they can go up and watch the planes take off and land. So I think just, being a little bit proactive and going and have a look and seeing if the school could do a trip to a business or or something like that, and find out more. So I think, teachers can be really proactive in that front. Schools can be. I mean, a lot of the schools around where we are very proactive. They want to come to see us all the time. They love it.
I suppose as well, that's where things like STEM ambassadors come in as well, where you can get those people to go into schools and talk about their careers or how they got into the subject that they're into as well. That's a really important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important that younger women do that. So it's all very well for me to go in, but my children are in their 20s. I'm, probably not as I'm not in with the kind of local, the new kind of way of talking, or I'm not kind of the trendy young person that's got into the engineering job. I think it would be great to see young women who are at the start of their careers supporting other women coming through and other girls coming through, because it's a bit more relatable. I try my best, but
I think it's important to have the both generations, because actually through this podcast 100%. I've been listening to your experiences, and you've had experiences that we have not experienced because we haven't faced those challenges. And I think it's really important to have both of those generations going and talking to people, because I've left this podcast feeling very motivated and very inspired, and I've really enjoyed listening to you talk about everything. So I think what you're doing is amazing, and I think people need to hear you as well.
Don't underestimate as well, I think, the power of seeing a working mother. And I think it's really important that if you are a caregiver to somebody as a female, I think you really need to tell people and champion that, because it's hard, but it's totally doable.
Yep.
And like for some people that might really feel like a big barrier. It did for me for a time. Oh my God, how am I gonna do this? So I am inclined to agree with Gemma here. I just think, and you know what, it was always other female caregivers that pulled me through and taught me the most things and helped me overcome all of the the family side of things can be really challenging. I mean, that is a challenge, and there is just a mere fact that we are the ones that actually have a child, which I love people afterwards call it your year off.
Oh yeah, right.
But just to see like that actually you can do all of these things. You really can. So I'm with Jem on this one. I think here to that. I think it's absolutely fantastic to see every single aspect of it.
So we're going to move on to our get to know me round now.
Okay.
And some of them are weather related, but a lot of them, as we go through, you'll realise they're just really random questions that we just like to throw at people and see what answers we can get. Okay. So our first question is always, what is your favourite season?
I like spring because it's too cold at the moment. Today's -5 when I set off for work this morning. I think spring is just everything comes back to life. It feels like a huge relief. The flowers start coming out and it's just starts to become beautiful again. And also you have quite a few bank holidays in spring, which is great, actually. So yeah, and it's not, sometimes it's too hot. I do a fair bit of running, which is my kind of release valve. And in the winter it's been cold, although I have been out. In the summer it could be too hot. So spring is often just right.
Gemma, just pointing out spring, because spring is mine. Gemma's is autumn. So win for me.
Do you know what? I'm swaying more towards spring nowadays, but I do really like autumn. But I was just thinking, she was saying about the running. I was thinking, I find layering in winter for running so tricky to get right. Like, do I need to put another jumper on? Am I going to be okay? Will I be too cold if I don't put this extra layer on? And then you start running and you're like, oh my gosh, I've layered too much now. What do I do? It's like a minefield.
My general rule is less than 10 degrees long sleeve. And then you should always think that when you start running, you're going to be cold, and you should assume that you are going to end up feeling 10 degrees more than it actually is. So
that's if you tip
at 5 degrees, you should assume that it feels like running in 15 degrees once you get going.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I like that.
If you had to choose between the beach or the mountains, what would you choose?
The mountains. I love it. So I love my skiing. I climbed Kilimanjaro last year, which was just amazing, actually.
Just throw that in there, by the way. I climbed Kilimanjaro.
Yeah, that was great. So it's my big adventure for kind of kids gone to university and turning 50, and then COVID happened, so it kind of got delayed, but we're still determined to do it. So my husband and I, we went with a with an organization guided kind of camping up all the way at Kilimanjaro. So it was pretty brutal, actually. Talk about weather. It was pretty brutal up there.
I bet.
So
And also it's really hard to breathe.
It's impossible to breathe. My God. Yeah. So there is 60% less oxygen
It's
up there.
remarkable.
So nothing lives up there. You're not supposed to be there.
I know.
How long did it take you?
We did 5 days up, 2 days down. So
Okay.
yeah, but you do a bit of acclimatization, and you kind of go up there, and then you camp, go up, and then camp, and then go up, and it's all a bit of an adventure. So
it sounds absolutely epic. I love hiking, so I'm not at the stage where I can do Kilimanjaro, but if you were a fruit or vegetable, what would you be?
I have no idea. A mango.
I just love that people come up with an answer. Everyone has an answer.
I don't know why they said that.
I don't think anyone's ever said mango before. I love mango.
It's quite exotic in some ways.
I mean, when you get a mango from where a mango is from, it is better than chocolate.
It is. It really is. You know, and it's very wholesome. Actually, if you have mango juice, it feels like it's not just a drink. It's kind of so yeah, I think, I don't know. Or coconut. I love coconut as well. I have coconut yogurt because I don't eat kind of milk or dairy. It kind of doesn't agree with me. So I have a lot of coconut kind of products, and I love coconut. And you know, when you get a proper coconut and you can drink the coconut water out of it, that's just amazing.
I just love that you came up with an answer, though. That's what I loved the most. People actually identified themselves with the fruit. I mean, it's phenomenal because everyone actually has an idea of what fruit they're like. It's really
It just popped into my head. I didn't really
it just shows you how like everyone is so different, because we have very rarely had a person say a similar fruit or vegetable to someone else. Like most people say a different one. And eventually we're going to be like, are there any more that we could say? But like no one's ever said mango. If you could have a superpower, what would it be?
Gosh, I don't know. I think I often say I just want to click my fingers and solve a problem in fast motion. So I don't like kind of faffing around and deliberating over a problem. If I've got a problem, I'd like to kind of like, I want to solve it, but often these things take a lot of time. So I'd love to be able to kind of click my fingers and fast forward through and just solve a problem that's making everyone miserable or is making everyone's life really difficult. So yeah, just to kind of fix stuff, and snap my fingers and it's done, rather than having, you know, often you have to kind of, I don't know, buy stuff or kind of make sure everyone's involved, and sometimes people don't want to do it that way, and I know that's all very, very, very important, but sometimes I think it'd be nice to just fix something.
Yeah, a bit of time traveling here and there wouldn't be a bad thing.
Yeah,
they're both really, really good good superpowers there. I always find as well that the other day it's like, you know, when it's really late at night and you just want to be in bed, but you have to go through the palaver of like brushing your teeth and washing
Taking your
face
makeup off. Oh
and
my
getting
God,
ready. I'm just like, oh, I wish I could just click my fingers and just literally
just
be in bed and be asleep. Yeah, don't want to miss out all the other steps.
This is the honest truth. At the end of my night shifts, so I've stopped doing nights now for work. I've stopped doing nights. At the end of my night shifts, I genuinely used to feel like if I had one wish right now, it would be to magic myself into bed. Like the idea of traveling home through London. Oh my God.
Yeah.
We've got 2 more questions. So if you could invite one person to dinner, it can be anybody at all from any historical time frame or even a fictional character, who would it be?
So I feel like I should say a woman. So I'd love to have the Pankhursts, actually. And I'd love to kind of I'd like to know what they think of the world now. You know, after all that effort and all of that pain in getting us the vote, you know, what do they think of how far we've come? Did they expect, like in, I don't know, 200 years that we would have come much further than this? Or, you know, not 200 years, 100 years, 150 years, we would have come much further than this. What do they think of how we're doing now? You know, and I think they'd be pretty, looking around the world, there would be some things that are very upsetting, because we wouldn't have had quite so much world knowledge in those days. It was very much focused on what was happening here. But yeah, what would happen? Am I allowed to say someone else as well?
You can say whoever you want. I mean, some like people from the suffragette era the movement would be absolutely amazing. I'd love to talk to people from that. But yeah, who else would you like to invite? You can have a load of people if you want.
Okay. So I recently read the book by Billie Jean King, the tennis player. I don't know if you've read that book. She's also done an interview on the BBC as well. She has been amazing for women. Oh my God. So, when I first was aware of her, she was kind of a little bit before my time. So I used to watch kind of Martina Navratilova, and she was a bit earlier than that. And she was always quite bad-tempered on court and quite serious and kind of, grouchy and stuff. And I used to think, oh, who's that woman? But when you read about what she's done for women, she set up the women's tour. She fought to get equal pay. She was really instrumental in getting equal pay or equal award money, prize money for women as for men. She kind of set up the women's tour and got them, proved that people wanted to come and see women play tennis. And she was so inclusive, and she still works, she's 80, I think, and she's still amazing. She still works for kind of equality, and she's just been such a massive force in kind of, tennis was the first sport that had equal prize money at the big competitions for men and women. And that was, a lot of that was her driving force. And I just think she's she's had her ups and downs. She's had her, things that have gone wrong, or, things that maybe, people don't agree with. But, she has really done a lot for women's sport and equality, and has just, been brilliant. I would recommend reading the book. It's not one of those autobiographies that's very kind of self-serving. It's very kind of, it's a really engaging read, and she's not kind of trying to show off and all of that, but it's really engaging. It's how she kind of set up the women's tour and how she kind of fought for women in sport. So,
and our final question that we like to ask people, we always mix this up a little bit. As we've been going through the Get to Know Me round, I've been thinking, what aspect can we take with it? But I think, what is one thing that you wish everybody knew about females in STEM?
I just think it's that appreciation of women's capabilities, and that women can do stuff, but they can do it differently. They might take a different approach, but the level of kind of intelligence that we have in the female population, we're missing out big time, because we're not harnessing that kind of intelligence and nurturing it. So I think just that kind of recognition. The other thing, actually, I was going to say earlier, you don't have to be a bloke to be a female engineer. So I know that, when I was coming through the ranks, I used to think, oh, I need to be kind of blokish to do this. And I say to the female engineers in the technician team at Stansted, you don't have to be a bloke to do this. You can wear nail varnish. You wear safety gloves over the top, so that's fine. You can wear, don't feel that you can't put your makeup on coming to work because you're an engineer, because you don't. This whole idea that you need to be blokey to be an engineer or be in science we need to get over that as well, because women can be women, but they can still do that job and they can still use their brains. So, yeah.
Yeah, we need to break down those stereotypes that are in place.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, just be what you want to be as well. However you want to present yourself, do that. Kathy, thank you so much for speaking to us.
That time's gone really quickly. Thank you.
It goes so fast. You should honestly, we worked very hard to try and keep this under an hour. We're awful for keeping things going. When we first started, oh my God, we'd have a 2-hour podcast. But really what we want is people to just have, just hear enough to think, okay, maybe I can do that, And so I think we definitely got that tonight. And yeah, no, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Great. It's been really, really a pleasure to talk to you, and we hope you've enjoyed it too.
Yeah, I have. I've really enjoyed it, actually.
If you have enjoyed this episode and would like to subscribe, rate and review the podcast, that would be amazing. It helps other people find our podcast, and our mission is to share our love of the weather. So the more people that can experience our podcast and listen to it, we can share our message and our love with more people in terms of the weather. If you would like to follow us on Instagram, we are For the Love of Weather. On X, I stumbled there because it's X, formerly Twitter. I had to put that in there. We are the number 4 Love of Weather. And Kathy, if anyone's listened to this podcast and they want to reach out to you, and maybe they've got a question they want to ask you, where could they get in contact with you?
I'd say through LinkedIn. If you've got that kind of question, just do it through there, because that's really my main social presence. I'm afraid I'm not trendy enough to have a TikTok account or an Instagram account, I'm afraid. So
LinkedIn is such an amazing place to meet so
it
many
is. I was going to say,
amazing
there's something
people.
to do with trend.
Yeah, and reach out to them. It's an amazing place. So definitely go onto LinkedIn, reach out to Kathy, go through, maybe you can find some other people that work in STEM that you can reach out to as well. I'm sure everyone will be very happy to talk to you and give you some advice if you need anything. And as always, we just hope that you leave this episode loving the weather just that little bit more.
Thanks for listening. Bye bye.